For the longest of times, comic book video games weren't exactly what you would call a hot commodity. Sure, they sold well, but video game developers always seemed to struggle nailing the transition from panel to pixel, a fact made worse, no doubt, by the industry's now thankfully extinct fascination with movie tie-ins. Of course, it's important to remember that there were still genuinely great comic book video games before the likes of Arkham Asylum and Spider-Man PS4 showed up on the scene. Some of the more notable examples include 2004's Spider-Man 2 movie tie-in, or even 2006's Marvel Ultimate Alliance. However, there are other slightly more overlooked and indeed underrated comic book video games that released over the last 2 decades, all of which are well worth playing. They might not be perfect, but the following titles are definitely in need of some new attention, especially from those who love comics. So, I'm Ewan, and here are 10 criminally underrated comic book video games you must play. Number 10. Justice League Heroes. It ain't no Marvel Ultimate Alliance, but Justice League Heroes is far from the terrible release critics opined it to be when it released in 2006. Made in the vein of Raven Software's X-Men Legends series, Justice League Heroes put players in control of some of the league's most iconic members, including Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, among many others. It didn't have 4-player capability, and certain levels locked players into the roles of 2 specific heroes, but it was still great fun, boasting a varied enough roster to keep things fresh over its 8-hour runtime. Ultimately, the fact that Justice League Heroes released the same year as Marvel Ultimate Alliance didn't do it any favors. It's nowhere near as good as Raven's epic RPG, but as a fun linear co-op title that lets you play as some of DC's finest, it's pretty commendable. Number 9. Batman Rise of Sin Tzu. One of the many video games based on Batman the Animated Series, Batman Rise of Sin Tzu released in 2003 and sort of disappeared soon after. Not literally, of course, but one could be forgiven for forgetting the game even exists, given the lack of attention it's received in the years since. Developed by Ubisoft back when their name was Ubisoft, how retro, Rise of Sin Tzu put players in the shoes of Batman, Robin, Batgirl, and Nightwing as they took on Sin Tzu, a brand new Batman villain created by superstar artist turned editor Jim Lee. Sin Tzu himself may not have caught on as well as B-Taz's other famous creations, Harley Quinn and Renee Montoya, but he was a formidable threat for the game and boasted a really fun design. The basic premise involves Sin Tzu organizing mass breakouts at Arkham Asylum and Stonegate Penitentiary, which leads Batman to take on some of his more famous adversaries in Scarecrow, Clayface, and Bane, among others. Gameplay itself was fairly rudimentary, not pushing any boundaries as far as the beat-em-up genre is concerned, but the addition of co-op made the whole thing worthwhile. Number 8. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus. Yes, while the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles may have primarily made a name for themselves through cartoons and films, the Brothers 4 actually started out life in the pages of a Mirage comic. Of course, if you were to recommend any one TMNT game for fans to play, it would be Turtles in Time. That said, there are a few hidden, turtly awesome gems out there for players to find if they go searching. And for those who love the 2003 animated series, you know, the one with the crazy good theme and dark tone, Battle Nexus should be their first port of call. A follow-up to the show's first beat-em-up tie-in that released in 2003, Battle Nexus adapted the second season of the show and allowed up to 4 players to take control of Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, and Raphael. It's definitely not the most intricate game going, but it's nowhere near deserving of the dismal review scores it got upon launch. Grab a friend, when it's safe to do so of course, a slice of your favorite pizza, and enjoy bashing foot ninjas while quipping terrible shell-based puns. Number 7. Spider-Man Edge of Time. Activision will never know what a good thing they had going with studios like Beenox and High Moon. The 2 companies now handle support for Call of Duty these days and little else, but at the beginning of the 2010s, both were busy working on different comic book franchises. For Beenox, that franchise was Spider-Man. 2011's Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions was fantastic. The studio made a brave call in divesting from the open-world formula that had governed Spidey's game since the 2004 movie tie-in, and it paid off, with the studio getting the chance to bring 4 different Spider-Men to life, all of which featured different voice actors from Spidey's past. But with success came many pitfalls, and it's still the case that Shattered Dimensions remains Beenox's best offering. Still, there is one other Beenox Spidey game that I feel as though gets a bit of an unfair rap, and that's Edge of Time. It downgraded Shattered Dimensions 4 Spider-Man to just 2, but it has a superb story written by veteran comic book writer Peter David and fun enough gameplay to boot. It might not be up there with the best, but it's far from the disaster its review scores would imply. Number 6. Guardians of the Galaxy: The Telltale Series. Until its demise the other year, Telltale Games have built up a solid rep for delivering compelling comic book video games, channeling the spirit of old-school LucasArts-esque point-and-click adventures into solid works like The Walking Dead, The Wolf Among Us, and Batman. There is one offering from the studio that's gone a little underappreciated though, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy. Released just after Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 premiered in 2017, Telltale's interpretation of the team borrowed heavily from the films but adopted an aesthetic more in line with Marvel's comics. It shares continuity with neither, which gave the studio's writers the freedom to craft their own story without any potential restrictions. The end result is really enjoyable, and if you're familiar with Telltale, you'll know what to expect. Number 5. Batman Vengeance. Vengeance is another Ubisoft Bat title and one that also follows on from Batman the Animated Series. It's effectively a lost episode, with the game's style and presentation mirroring BTAS's near enough perfectly. All the usual suspects are there as far as the cast concerned, with Kevin Conroy and Tara Strong reprising their roles as Batman and Batgirl respectively. Mark Hamill, Arlene Sorkin, and Bob Hastings also return to voice Joker, Harley Quinn, and Commissioner Gordon. The gameplay is pretty decent, but it's the story and presentation where Vengeance really shines through. It features a bombshell opening and an eerie tone throughout, but the cherry on top is that each level comes with its own little title card, just like the animated series did back when it aired in the 90s. That isn't to say the gameplay is forgettable or anything like that either. Combat and navigation is fun and intuitive, and Ubisoft went to great lengths to grant players access to the Dark Knight's entire arsenal, featuring an assortment of gadgets to play with. Even the Batmobile and Batwing make appearances. It's nowhere near as definitive as Arkham, but players won't find a better game based on BTAS than Ubisoft's criminally overlooked title. Number 4. X-Men Legends 2: Rise of Apocalypse. Raven Software were responsible for Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, as well as its follow-up Jedi Academy, two of the most critically acclaimed Star Wars games ever made. However, they're perhaps most fondly known for their Marvel games, particularly Marvel Ultimate Alliance and 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. While those two titles are stellar and encapsulate the best bits about Raven, it's meant that their other two Marvel games, X-Men Legends and X-Men Legends 2: Rise of Apocalypse, have gone overlooked. This really makes no sense, as apart from the change in roster, there is nothing about either title that makes them inferior to MUA. They're probably the most authentic X-Men games fans have ever gotten, and those who've read the comics are bound to get a double kick out of them. Number 3. Batman Arkham Origins. Okay, so Batman Arkham Origins. It's my favorite Arkham game, and it's also the one that was an unfortunate victim of circumstance. You see, when Origins was announced in 2013, it was facing something of an uphill climb. Fans were still digesting the bombshell ending to Batman Arkham City, and when it was announced the next entry in the series wasn't going to be a sequel, and that Rocksteady wouldn't be developing it either no less, there was a bit of a backlash. Arkham, for better or for worse, was seen as Rocksteady's baby, and without that studio at the helm, and with no Kevin Conroy or Mark Hamill, Origins was almost seen like an imposter. It wasn't as polished as the Rocksteady entries, and it's understandable why the recycling of certain content would have frustrated players, but its pros still far outweigh its cons. For starters, Arkham Origins has the best story in the entire series. Joker and Batman's first meeting has been played out so many times in the comics and films, but Origins found a way to make it fresh and exciting. Fans also tend to overlook the many gameplay advancements the prequel made, with Montreal bringing the Batcave, CSI-style detective work, and new enemy types to the fore. Plus, it kinda sorta has the best boss battles in the entire series, but don't tell Rocksteady I said that. Number 2. Ultimate Spider-Man. Ultimate Spider-Man is one of those games I look back on and just wonder how it even exists. Games based on specific Spider-Man comics had been a thing before, sure, but the years running up to 2005 had seen Activision and Studio Treyarch pivot to movie tie-ins, with 2002 and 2004 Spider-Man games both being adapted from the Sam Raimi films. There was no indication the studio would look to the comics for inspiration, let alone one as specific as Ultimate Spider-Man. The game has long been overshadowed by its hugely influential predecessor, Spider-Man 2, but just because a game was influential doesn't mean it's superior. Ultimate Spidey is an improvement over the 2004 game, and for plenty of reasons. Not least because it adapts the art of the comic perfectly, but also because it gave players access to Manhattan and Queens. 2018's Spider-Man game is still the wall crawler's best, but Ultimate Spider-Man deserves the silver medal. And number 1, Transformers War 4/Fall of Cybertron. Like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it may surprise some to learn that the Transformers started out life as a comic book. Granted, they were developed in conjunction with Hasbro and Takara, but the entire lore behind the series was invented by Marvel's Bob Budiansky. Transformers is of course one of the most successful toy lines of all time, but success doesn't always mean quality. The robots in disguise have suffered more than a couple of duff adaptations over the years, including the Bay films, but also in video games. Which is why it was such an amazing surprise when High Moon came along, gathered up all the Autobots and Decepticons, and delivered one of the all-time great comic book video games in 2010's Transformers War for Cybertron. Oh, and then they followed that up with another stellar title in Fall of Cybertron, which added the Dinobots, which also automatically makes it the best thing ever made. High Moon don't get nearly enough praise for what they did on the Cybertron titles. They're both games you can tell were made with a great deal of love and care by fans of the original cartoon and the toys that accompanied it. The fact they never got the chance to finish the series by taking it to Earth is one of Activision's biggest crimes, and the fact the studio is stuck working on Call of Duty only adds further insult to injury.